Good afternoon, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. This is a special episode 86, and we're joined by a very special guest. Her name is Vanessa Otero, and she's the CEO of Ad Fontes Media at the Source in Latin. And she's based in Colorado. The company launched in 2018, I believe. And the beautiful thing about Ad Fontes Media is that Otero was the original creator of the media bias chart, and we may get into how this all came about. Of course, we're going to get into how that all came about. That's part of the reason why I invited Ms. Otero on. But I just want to say from Kiko's Free Thinkers Forum, our audience to yours, thanks again for accepting our invitation and welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to our discussion.
No doubt. Before we get started, I just want to give a brief plug to the pod, the YouTube channel. We're really exclusively a YouTube channel now, Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. We're 16 months into operation. We've reached over 165 plus countries, and we've reached all 50 states. And we have such an international audience. 43% of our listenership and viewership is outside the United States. And that was always the point of Kiko's Freethinkers Forum, to make it an international community forum. Today is a very interesting interview. I'm so excited for it because there is some overlap, I think, in what we do in ways, but I would be, I guess, the judge. I would be part of the media. I never thought I would be in the media landscape myself. And so we may get into that, how Kiko's Freethinkers Forum would measure up against other types of biases and other shows. But I know a lot of my audience members were stoked that we were able to get this interview. So let's start with our conversation here. And the first question, I guess, for you is, what is Vanessa Otero's backstory, and how do we kind of condense that into like a few minutes? You can spend as much time as you want as far as just your personal journey and how
Mhm.
you kind of got an interest in media in the first place, like your initial interest.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I love talking about how I got into this line of work. Media wasn't my background. Uh, when I started working on the very first media bias chart, I was actually practicing as a patent attorney in Colorado. So I spent a total of 6 years as a patent attorney, working mostly with software patents. Software wasn't even my background though. I had spent some time. I was an English major in college. I was in sales for a number of years, and then I decided to go to law school several years into my sales career, and I ended up being a patent attorney, basically getting patents through the patent office. So great job where I got to work with a lot of other entrepreneurs, a lot of other inventors. But I always had a passion for uh, something unique that not a lot of people have a passion for, but it's good arguments, rhetorical analysis. That's where the English major and the law school education kind of come together. And what bothered me in 2016, if everyone remembers that election, it was Hillary versus Trump, and it was sort of the height of the Facebook news feed and people sharing links to articles and then using them to fight with each other in really unproductive ways. And what really bothered me was the fact that people would share links from hyper-partisan, very polarizing news sources or YouTube videos in an effort to try to convince people and their friends and family to think how they thought, but they were just so ineffective because if you're on the left and you share something that's compelling to you from the left with somebody that's on the right, it's typically not very compelling to them. And then vice versa. If you're on the right, the things that convince you don't convince the folks on the left, especially if some of them are very opinionated or hyperbolic or even worse, misleading or inaccurate. So I created this infographic, the very first one, the media bias chart, and I did it as a hobby. I wanted to talk to my friends and family effectively about how some news sources are good, some are okay, some are not good, some are left and right, and some are way out on the crazy edges. And just visualize that. It went viral, much to my surprise, in 2016. I kept working on it. It sort of took over my life up until 2018, when I decided, I think there's an opportunity here to provide more data, to provide a robust methodology, to add more news sources, and to make this less biased, and not be just about me and what I think. So I knew it was really important at that time to be able to bring in other people from different political backgrounds into the fold and develop this work. That was 2018. So we're almost 6 years on from that, and it's been quite a wild ride.
Yes, I think that's a really important point raised about the starting point for a lot of people that finally, for the first time, they may not have been overtly political, but they may have, gotten more active because of the polarization that occurred.
Hmm.
Um, and the media played a lot into that. The media plays a lot into sensationalism, creating the polarizations to begin with. And I
Hmm.
don't even know if a lot of the organic polarization on the ground would even explode if it wasn't for this media bringing out like every single snippet of news to to accommodate whoever you're supporting, like you were saying before. um Categories on Kiko's Freethinkers forum has always been problematic. We come across as we're naturally skeptical of hierarchies, of establishments in general. And I see a lot of value in the media bias chart. I see so much value in it. We can maybe discuss some of the methodologies and stuff, but I almost thought of it when I first heard of it. It's kind of like the political compass chart. It's not something that's linear. There's
Hmm.
always room for interpretation. I mean, when you say the left, the right, the center, um,
Hmm.
that has a lot of different meanings to different
It does.
people. And then you talk about the actual what's newsworthy and what's reliable.
Right.
That's quite interesting. Is it possible for you to pull up a media bias chart for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can talk through some of those concepts about our taxonomy, what it means, things are left, right, and center, and all the things that you just brought up. So would you mind letting me share my screen and I can
No
just bring
doubt.
that right up?
And I wasn't that wasn't meant to be a loaded question, but it was a lot, I guess, if you think about it, because I'm talking casually. And it's different, I guess, when you already have a base in politics and
Mm-hmm.
news and what's considered the news, even not. But
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm curious about. And I'm sure you'll probably explain to our audiences what you mean by that.
Yeah. Well, people have seen the static infographic. It's been various versions of it that we come out with over time, circulate on social media. And not a lot of folks know that on our website we have an interactive version. This is our pro version. We have free versions as well, where you can search a handful of news sources, but we also have a mobile app where you can search any of our news sources. We have over 3,000 of them. So I'll just blank this out for a little bit. You get the sense that there's lots of news sources on here. What I'm
Hmm.
showing you is about 1,500 of the 10,000 or so that we've rated. So we do it across websites and articles, TV and video, and podcasts and audio. So I'll just it, initially, intuitively, people will say, "Oh yeah, there's stuff that's left and right." But the more you think about politics, especially if you're very savvy and pay a lot of attention to it, you realize left and right are very complex things. And we have to define, well, what do we mean by left and right?
Hmm.
So our left right spectrum, it reflects that it's US based because we have US analysts, and that's as opposed to worldwide, because what's left and right in the United States is slightly different even from our neighbors like Canada or other English speaking Western democracies in Europe or Australia. They map fairly closely, but think about how great a difference is in left and right in Saudi Arabia or France. Like it's different. So this is from a U.S. perspective. Two, it's contemporary versus like all time. There's not
Hmm.
really like a universal all time left and right. Like there's some things that persist over time, but in general, what's left and right shifts. It's related to the concept of the Overton window, where
Hmm.
political, like what's acceptable in political discourse shifts. So what's considered left and right in a particular country at a particular time is that changes, and we're trying to measure. An example I like to use is if you just look at one issue of the legality of same-sex marriage.
Hmm.
Prior to Barack Obama's first term, Barack Obama it was not for same-sex marriage. The Democratic Party was not for same-sex marriage. That would be like a hyper-partisan left position to be so. But in 2012, 2013, when Obama said that he had evolved his thoughts on that and that he was for it, well, that became more of like a median left position held by the leader of the Democratic Party. And then it became law of the land in 2015. So
Mm-hmm.
now, like, whether same-sex should be legal is more of a middle position. Now, the last thing we anchor it on is we're trying to measure how biased the media is, and we have to anchor it, compare it to something. So we compare it to the stated positions of our elected officials in the United States, because it's something that's concrete and measurable. Like, they say things on TV, on social media, in their party platforms, on their websites, so you can understand where their current positions are at a particular time. And you and I can all name who's the most extreme right-leaning elected official in Congress, and a few names would come to mind. Or who's the furthest left-leaning person on the Democratic Party that's elected. And then, there's media that's certainly further out left and right than those folks. So that's where we put our most extreme left and right. And the last point I'll make about bias is this middle section. See, it says middle or balanced bias. Now, we don't say neutral. We don't say unbiased, because there's really no such thing as being unbiased. And being in the middle just by itself doesn't mean it's the best. You can be in the middle because you're truly minimally biased, and we do appreciate that about news sources when they're just trying to say it as straightforwardly as they can. But you can also be in the middle because you're centrist biased. And centrism is a political position, like a centrist senator, or like Joe Manchin. That's a political position. But then you can also have a balance of biases. So if you have a far right and a far left commentator on your news program, yes, it averages out to be in the middle, but it doesn't mean it's good. So you can be low. Let me just pull up the sources again so you can see. Yeah, there's a high correlation between, minimally biased, or between middle and high reliability. But you can see there's stuff that's high reliability, there's stuff that's okay, there's some stuff that's like not that great, and it's in the middle. So middle doesn't mean best. Up at the top means most reliable. I'll stop there because I've been talking for a little while, but I can
No,
be
you're
happy to
fine.
explain how we measure reliability too.
No, I love it when you're talking because there's just so many. I got a ton of questions, but just looking at this chart, and I know my audience will be mesmerized by this graphic. I think it's amazing personally, and I think it's great work that you and your organization does because, I mean, how does first of all, who's behind your team? How are you able to come up with so many different types of shows and types of media, and
Mhm.
what goes into how many people evaluate a source?
Great questions. As I mentioned, we have over 3,000 news sources.
Hmm.
3,000 that we display on here. We've rated about 10,000 total, and I'm gonna pull up some. What you'll see populate here is a bunch of dots, and all those dots are going to represent individual articles and episodes that our team has rated. So we've been doing this rating news and news-like sources for almost 5 years now, and with a big team of analysts. And currently on our team, we have about 60 analysts. Now they're diverse across their political ideologies, left, right, and center, and they're diverse across other personal characteristics like age, race, and gender, because everyone's got their own perspectives, especially when it comes to bias. So I'm going to just I'll pull up a couple of examples of some well-known news sources here. And again, you can search these on our chart.
Hmm.
You can just type in any news source that you want to look up. And again, on our mobile app, it's free. You can search any of them. And what you see here, I'll pull up the New York Times, and you'll see generally this axis over here for reliability. Things that are 40 and above, like this top section in the green, is what we consider highly reliable, consistently over time. Things
Mm-hmm.
between 24 and 40 in the middle, that's analysis and opinion. And closer to the top means it's more fact dense, more supported by fact. Down towards the bottom means it's more opinionated and less supported in fact. And then there's a line between what's merely opinion and what is more propagandistic and vitriolic. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people say, oh, this is just an opinion, but it's dehumanizing and it vilifies the other side, and use a lot of insults. So that would we would put below this line of 24. So it's not necessarily misleading. You wouldn't call it, quote, misinformation, but it's not great. And there's a lot of content out there like that. Below this line of 16 and 8 are things that actually contain misleading or inaccurate info that we have citations for. We try to avoid the term misinformation or disinformation because it's so co-opted and politicized anyways. But
Mm-hmm.
you see the New York Times, the logo is a little small here, but New York Times, it falls in our skews left category, and it falls in our mix of fact analysis and reporting. So generally reliable, but you'll see that there's a lot of dots, and each one of these individual dots is an article that our analysts have rated. So this is it's a lot of dots. It's over almost 700 dots just for the New York Times that we've rated, and each one of them has been looked at by 3 analysts, one left, one right, one center, in a pod at the same time. If you look at this this article over here, this is in the strong left analysis section. So the bias score on this one is going to be different from, the New York Times articles can have highly reliable, minimally biased articles, but then they can also have left-leaning opinion and analysis articles. And so, so here's the, that opinion article title. And something like the Wall Street Journal has a similar type of profile where it has perfectly minimally biased fact reporting articles, especially about finance, but then a lot of right-leaning opinion and analysis content in that particular section. So when you look at stuff that's down on the towards the left or towards the right, you'll see that there's differing profiles for these articles. So again, each one of these has been rated by our analysts as each one of these dots has been rated by our analysts. We have done this for over 78,000 individual pieces of content. So that means we're watching the episodes, we're watching the videos, we're rating them together. It's a lot of work, but this happens all day, every day on shifts in Zoom. So we use that data to populate the media bias chart and use it in our various products.
So we're going to skip around some because there's a lot of things going on in my brain and just a lot of things
Sure.
going on the chart. I mean, and again, I think this is very fascinating because we, I won't say market ourselves, but in our description, we describe ourselves as providing other narratives counter to the Wall Street Journal, counter to CNN or Fox, these so-called legacy media sources. So one question I have is, would you judge a podcast or a YouTube channel like Kiko's Freethinkers Forum? We tend to go into very deep issues, like very specific types of people come on, and we'll talk 2 to 3 hours sometimes about whether it's socialism, whether it's about blacks in Panama, whether it's LGBTQ culture in Puerto Rico. It could be a very targeted topic. And then we may have politicians come on and we talk about completely different things. How do you measure various types of media? Because that's not the same as like a sit-in program like Al Sharpton or any of the programming on Fox News versus my show or even a Wall Street Journal article. How do you measure those various types of media?
Great question. And our analysis is a truly a content analysis rating methodology. So we are looking at sub factors that we can rate on pretty much any a type of content. So it doesn't matter if something it has been around for 100 years or more, like the New York Times, or somebody just came out with a podcast last week, or a Substack, or something like that. We can rate anything, and anything can be reliable, and minimally biased. Like any kind of content, whether it's new or old, a small operation or a big one, can be a highly reliable, minimally biased, and score really well in our system. Or something that's really big and has been around for a long time can score low as well. So we're not looking at things like, how long has it been around? Is this like a well-known name? Is this trusted? Because one of the benefits of our information ecosystem is that lots of folks, there's a lower barrier of entry to people who want to cover new things, like independent journalists. There's people can put their voices out there. So the drawback to that is it's really hard to sort through sometimes how credible someone is, because somebody can be brand new and have like a great like journalism ethics and what have you, or have a very like honest, fact-based discussion. Typically YouTube shows, podcasts, when people are discussing issues, a lot of them will fall in the opinion or analysis section. That's just the nature of that kind of content, and there's a big audience for it because like on this show, people want to talk about issues and have like deep conversations about them. There's a big audience for that, certainly. But it often talks about the news, but it usually isn't the news itself. It's not usually going out and finding a new groundbreaking story. Sometimes it is. Sometimes podcasts are journalism-based podcasts where they bring you new information. So in our chart, we just have a hierarchy. So you can have what we put at the top is the work journalists do in that hierarchy, because the rest of the information news ecosystem wouldn't really exist without it. And we put at the top things that are not only journalism, but they're true and they're minimally biased, etc. Now, there's definitely a space for analysis and opinion. And the more fact-based and the more supported it is, the higher up in that analysis section it can go. So it's not bad to be in an analysis section. It's not even bad to be in the opinion section. But we want to help people identify when that opinion is, dipping into the things that I mentioned, the vilification and dehumanization and insults, because that kind of discourse degrades folks, but it's still also very appealing. It's very appealing for folks to sit there and listen to stuff like, yeah, I agree, I rail against like the other side, they're my enemies, and because they're stupid and evil. That's a lot of our content in the podcast and YouTube landscape, unfortunately.
See, I'd categorize my particular platform as an educational forum first and foremost. I'm an educator. I have a PhD in Spanish, and a lot of the times, if I'm bringing on a guest, I would discuss their book because I've read their book previously. Like I've already done the homework and stuff, and so I think that's bringing new information to newer audiences. And I also don't limit myself to even though I would identify as a leftist, and not a U.S. leftist, but more so probably Latin American leftist, I guess. And that's another question I have too. But it's one of those things where you're judging yourself, and people who are not in your, I guess, realm are going to judge you differently too. But we see ourselves now as a leftist channel because we want to really bring in all types of perspectives, because we see it as people expanding their minds the more we learn from each other, as opposed to left, right, center, or any of this mess. The whole idea of categories sort of bother us because it's hard to define what the left, center, and right is, because, and I'm curious, this is a question I have so I don't ramble too much, is there isn't international sources yet, but how would that alter the media bias chart if you included international sources, since it's so heavily US based to begin with?
Well, we do have some international sources because there are a lot of sources outside the US that publish a lot of content into the US for US based audiences. So we have English and Spanish sources rated that are, national and international. I can just show you
Oh, that
some
makes sense.
some examples of that. So what we don't do currently is, we're not rating a bunch of publications in India that are directed at Indian audiences because the left-right spectrum in India really it is quite different from here. There's a lot of different parties, and to accurately judge what would be considered left and right in certain parts of the world, like India, would require um, the perspective of folks who live in that culture, who understand the politics of that culture. However, we can rate content that is broadcast and faces the U.S. from the U.S. Left-right perspective. So let me just show you on this chart some
Hmm.
international sources. Here are a bunch of them. So I can pull up. So we have countries. We have news sources from all of these countries that will publish in English and that are available in the United States in some capacity. So you've got some things like BBC in the UK and the Globe and Mail in Canada, and then things that would be a little bit more obscure. El Mundo is primarily in Spain. So yeah, there's still quite a bit of spread.
That's just
I
like, for
forgot what
instance,
your question was.
like the RT, for instance, is interesting. And I've noticed
Yeah.
this. We've actually had Margaret Kimberly on 3 times from Black Agenda Report. And Black Agenda Report is in the bottom left quadrant of
Mm-hmm.
your chart.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had a lot of people on associated with Russia Today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. I would not consider Russia Today right whatsoever. But it's funny because most of the leftist channels that I follow, they're very heavy in the RT, but they wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
even identify themselves as right leaning at all. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
I'm just curious about how that works or whatever, like the network itself versus individual commentators that have affiliations
Mm-hmm.
with RT. It just seems really, I think at that point becomes almost arbitrary because like I said, I don't know exactly what the left, right, and center is based on still in the US. I don't even know if the US is sure of itself when it comes. I guess that's where the difference I would have from a lot of other platforms is
Mm-hmm.
because we're skeptical of the political spectrum to begin with. Because,
Mm-hmm.
if you base it on the political compass, most of the politicians are in the upper right quadrant anyway. The same ones that people argue with, like Clinton and Trump and Bush, they're all in the
Mm-hmm.
same quadrant politically. But when you put this in the
Well,
media landscape, it's very diverse.
let me show you a couple of things for from unusual sources like RT. And I'm gonna pull up our RT the website.
Hmm.
And so we've people who asked us about RT, especially in the during like 2016 to 2020 when Trump was in office. A lot of folks would ask us about RT, and it's a really unusual news source. As you know, it's owned by the Russian government,
Hmm.
and we got a really large sample of articles, and what you'll notice is that the overall score is skews right. But what's this? We've got articles that are right. We've got articles that are all the way out left. Yeah, not just one or two, like a handful of articles are
Hmm.
pretty out there to the left, and then you've got some misleading articles that are right there in the middle. So what's all that about? Well, there are like this one is misleading. This is about a bio uh Russia accusing the Ukrainians of having
Oh God,
biolabs.
got
Yeah.
rid of.
Now why do you laugh?
Because it's interesting is that you asked why I laugh is because I've had to measure, because this is my platform. I'm the only person responsible for the guests that come on this show. it's
Mm-hmm.
my discretion to decide who I want on my show.
Mm-hmm.
And even though a lot of my peers will be friendly towards some of these like personas,
Mm-hmm.
that don't mean that I want to bring them on for my particular interest, because I
Mm-hmm.
really do want to feel that I think when you bring certain people on, it's almost deliberately meant to like solidify certain audiences and potentially ostracize other ones. And I have to be
Correct.
careful about who I bring on. And like I said, I don't know Scott Ritter personally,
Mm-hmm.
but I just know that I don't have enough interest in whatever Scott Ritter is talking about to bring him on, because I think it's just too specific. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think it gets to a point, just like people who are talking about COVID. Like I didn't
Mm-hmm.
get the vaccine, for instance. I didn't get the series of vaccines, but I don't think it's noteworthy to keep talking about it for years and
Mm-hmm.
years and years either, just
Mm-hmm.
because I agree with you. Okay, body autonomy, whatever. I believe people should have the right, to get abortions. I use kind of that rationale, but at the same time, is it even worth talking about it for 10 years, 15 years? And I feel like certain personas make their commentary careers based on one or two issues. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
reason why I kind of avoid bringing on people
Mm-hmm.
like that. I want to bring people on that have a wide range of knowledge.
Yeah. So let me that the wide range that will affect like the overall bias score like in our system, because we're not looking at what's RT overall like generally. Well, we do have an average score of it of RT. More of its content is to the right than it is to the left, just volume wise, but
Hmm.
it's not uniform, so it's not as far right as certain other programs, because a lot of this stuff over here, what a lot of RT has in common is anti-American sentiment. So anti-American isn't necessarily like left right. If they have like anti-government articles, anti-government can be like criticizing the US police, US law enforcement, which would
Hmm.
find a lot of sympathy on the US left. Or criticizing the American government by saying, oh, our elections are corrupt, maybe, and they would find a lot of sympathy with those articles on the right. So you see that there's a lot of stuff in the middle that's just like not very reliable, but it's opinionated, but it's not necessarily left right opinionated. It's just like
Hmm.
anti-American opinionated.
Hmm.
And then if you look at RT, like the just TV in general, we have actually a lot of them went offline, so we don't we've archived them. But let me show you. Here's another really fascinating one people love to talk about is Joe Rogan.
Oh,
And this gets to your point about different people on different shows. Now, this show that you brought me on, and I'm when I speak about what we speak about, I try to remain minimally biased, highly analytical as well. And so, the conversation that we've had today is ranging in analysis, opinion, bringing some new information to your audiences. And generally, I don't think people would listen to this and say, oh, this is definitely very left are definitely very right. I don't think that would be like this episode, probably not. Okay. But Joe Rogan, 3 hour show, very commonly, but sometimes he has guests all the way to the left. I think one of these is a episode that he had with Bernie Sanders. Yep.
hmm.
And then he'll have episodes that are with people who are non-political, like who's Erica Thompson. I think this might be a rock climber, and they talked about rock climbing. It's
Hmm.
apolitical. But then he'll also have guests that are these shows are, I think this show was Alex Jones came on his show,
Hmm.
or like Robert Malone. So he's had a handful of interviews providing a lot of free reign and space to people whose content, like what they were talking about, was misleading or untrue and to the right. So the overall show itself really the overall rating of the Joe Rogan show is highly dependent on who he chooses to have as a guest, because on most of his shows 80%, 90% of the show is his guest talking.
Hmm. Yes. And that's an interesting point, because I was thinking before this interview, is there more weight on the guest or the show's content? Because
Well,
they kind of go hand in hand.
they do. So say for example, I mean, if you think about this, like you have the political position of the host and you have the political position of the guest. And sometimes they could, balance each other out. So say that you had somebody who is, a very right-leaning podcast host, and then they brought on a right-leaning podcast guest. Well, they just be talking and agreeing with each other, and like that podcast, put it over to the right. But what if that right-leaning podcast host had a left-leaning podcast guest and they were having a debate? And it was like a fairly even, like handed and like fair-minded debate where they had equal time. That would sort of shake out more towards the middle. But if that that host could also have that left-leaning guest and try to trap them and get them with gotcha questions and try to make them look bad. So again, that would be
Mm.
over to the right. And so the time spent talking and the type of questions that are asked, like the host's posture towards the guest, is really indicative. If the guest is talking for 80 or 90%, and the host is just like, all right, what do you got to say? Just say it out there. Then what the guests say, their political viewpoint and their opinions and like what and the reliability of what they say is going to matter more in the rating.
That makes total sense. I appreciate that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because every format is different, but that
Mm-hmm.
totally makes sense with the guests because at that point you're just platforming someone and they're giving, their views and analysis about a certain subject. I
Certainly.
I think when we talk about skepticism in general when it comes to mainstream media, we're very highly critical of mainstream media. I'm shocked that the mainstream media sources are so high in reliability because the way I see it is, sure, there may be a presentation of certain facts, but I feel like the mainstream media also excludes a lot of information. And if you dig deeper in analysis, maybe those ratings would change. I feel like mainstream media does what it needs to do to solidify its name recognition in the first place. Like they present certain topics, but they're almost shallow. They don't really go into detail with those topics a lot. But I think if you brought those same anchors and people are the own personalities onto a show like this, and we were able to actually have a deeper conversation, I think it would be a completely different rating for the organization itself. Because I think right now you have the news organizations, and there's so many filters of information. You have the people in the newsroom, and then they're getting their information from a bunch of writers and other people. There's just so many hands in the pot. But with me, it's one person talking to one person in yourself, and it's not like a whole team of people saying, "Oh, should we present this story? Should we present this one?" I think that is very. I won't say it's problematic, but I think that causes a lot of skepticism in people because most people don't trust the mainstream media. I think the polls come out, it's at an all-time low. People don't trust legacy media, and that's why they
Well,
gravitate to
I'll
shows.
push. I'm going to push back a little bit on
Okay.
that because I I my criticism of your criticism of mainstream media is that it's too broad. What do you mean by mainstream media? Like which organizations and what articles and like what I mean there's people will throw out, the top things that they're familiar with, like the New York Times, the Washington Post, or CNN, and say and like that's their concept of mainstream media. But there are hundreds, thousands of journalism organizations. I mean, you think about all the local news publications. You think about,
Hmm.
AP and Reuters. There are wire services that employ thousands of journalists around the world and have them, located in locations around the world. Um, so it's easy to like lump the media in to like one thing, like the mainstream media or legacy media are sort of the terms of art, like the popular terms that folks use today to criticize like a bunch of things. But when criticism of the media, the broader it is, the less precise it is. So just saying like people don't trust the mainstream media because it's like bias, like I don't even know what to do with that. How do you even try to fix it? How do you even try to measure it? It's too broad. But you can say something like, CNN made this mistake in this article. They said it was this way, but it was actually this way, and they didn't correct it in time. Like that is specific. And what we're measuring is, how much you can rely on a particular outlet over time to consistently bring you new information that would be hard for you to uncover yourself, um, that's important to you, that's covered truthfully and in a way that's fact dense, like has a lot of facts, brings you a lot of facts. You need organizations for that. You and I, like, although there's value in diving deep on something, you and I together in this hour cannot bring everyone all the information about what's happening at the local, national, and international level in our world today. Like, we as humans inherently rely on a network, on a universe of other people to bring us information.
Hmm.
And and we have to be able to discern what is likelier to be true and what's unlikely to be true. And in different situations, it's going to be different people. So if there was a shooting in like a town in Minnesota or something, who is in the best position to know the truth about what happened? Probably the local reporters there. But if something goes wrong with an election machine in Antrim County, Michigan, who's in the best position to know that information? Well, it's probably the clerk and county recorder. It's like different people in different situations. So
Hmm.
to be able to identify, like, is this person that's bringing me the information in this situation credible or not? That's what we're trying to help people point to and identify. So just like, I think people's criticism of large media organizations that have been around for a long time is that they have vested interests in you having good relationships with other powerful people or organizations like governments and corporations and things of that nature. Um, but that doesn't mean that they can't accurately report on things that have nothing to do with that.
I I guess what I mean by the comment I made earlier is, to me there's a major difference between local news, because even the way the formats of the shows are, if you take local news shows, a lot of local news shows don't have extensive opinion piece
Hmm.
setups. If you
Hmm.
look at CNN, Fox, what I mean by the mainstream media, that particular format, which is quote unquote political commentary,
Yeah.
they're pretty much the backbone of those networks or individual shows driven by personalities, own television
Yeah. I'm not
personalities.
a fan of those.
And,
I don't think those are news. They're
and those,
opinion.
but
Yeah.
they rate very high on your chart. I think they're
Oh
rated
no,
way too high.
not the cable news shows. The cable news shows don't rate very high on our chart. They're like opinion left and right for the most part. They rate as opinion.
Hmm.
And we've got some low rated cable news shows as well. So like it, so if you look at the difference between like print, like online and print
Hmm.
content versus TV content, even from the same network, the online content will always score higher because it's just like
Okay.
news articles. The like the evening opinion stuff, like even the daytime versus evening, you can have morning shows on even on MSNBC and Fox News and CNN that are like, here's what's happening around the country today. And then in the evening, it's like, here's why people invading our border, and here's why, we're descending into fascism. It's like a lot of opinion and sensationalism in the evenings, and those shows score a lot lower.
I'd be curious to see where this show rates, because we put a
We'll rate
lot of
it. Yeah,
we
we'll throw it in our queue and have our analysts rate it.
because we put a lot of time into these episodes, like and we take it very seriously. Um but I agree with your overall sentiment, and I'm glad I did this interview because I have a better understanding of your methodology, and I definitely see you all as nonpartisan. I can see that
Hmm. Hmm.
without a problem. I know you all have been attacked as being neoliberal and being this and that and all that stuff. But that's honestly not even my interest. I'm not trying
Hmm.
to convince someone that somebody's neoliberal or
Hmm.
conservative or anything like that. But I definitely agree that the news, I think what people view as news is unfortunately what influences us so much, which is driven by that heavy social commentary, whether it's
Hmm.
Tucker Carlson or anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a difference between the print articles, but I can't tell
Mm-hmm.
you the last time I talked to a friend and we cited print articles. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I read some every once in a while, but I like to read books. I don't even like reading like the news articles. But I totally get what you're saying. But I think what people's view of news is pretty much those personalities. It's become that, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah, there's much better content out there, especially printed and yeah, in local, it's for sure.
But Vanessa, do you have any final words for my audience? I just want to say thank you again because I reached out to you because last year I had several like conversations with people from Ad Fontes Media, like on Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
because it keeps popping up on the channel. Ad
Uh-huh.
Fontes Media, a lot of the ads come up, and I was like, wow, I'm surprised that these people are actually responding to my questions and concerns. But and mine were more around the left, right, center. That stuff bothers me like crazy. Like what's left, right, center? And I mean, I still have issues with those categories because
Mm-hmm.
the US left to me and the right and the center, if you like what do we base if you keep microscoping and panning it out, everything's in the center. I mean, if you and I'm being kind of silly when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
that, but it's all about perception at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day. And I believe that people are open to change. I think that people can change, and that's the reason why I believe independent media is so crucial in these times. Because I'm not convinced that people are stuck in a range. And you said that comment earlier that I agree with, that people aren't stuck, that things can change over time,
Mm-hmm.
that these
Mm-hmm.
ratings can change over time. So
Mm-hmm.
that was good to hear those comments.
Mm-hmm.
But do you have any final words for my audience today?
Yeah, it's important for folks to be able to discern these things on their own. And just having that framework in your head that, like, you want to look for things that are for your news, like for your information that you're making your decisions on, things that are full of facts. Not things that are full of, what could happen in the future, like predictions, just questions. Questions aren't the news. The answers to the questions are the news, and keep an eye out for those differences, and then just realize that everything has a bias, and it's not necessarily a bad thing to have a bias, but to be able to differentiate between something that's bringing you a lot of facts as straightforwardly as possible is going to set you on a path for making better decisions for yourself. um, that's and I highly recommend lateral reading, just getting your information from multiple news sources. And our media bias chart is a great way to find some stuff that's has different perspectives, but is still reliable. So not all. I mean, if you want to read stuff that's in the bottom corners just to know what's going on there, go for it. But buyer beware.
Yeah, and again, I guess a part of this show is that we don't like to discredit anything unless we find it out for ourselves. And that's
Hmm.
kind of the point of being a free thinker, is to, let the free thinker decide, if it's like worthy or not.
Hmm.
But I definitely see what you're saying when it comes to like biases in general. I totally understand that. But at the same time, they're not a bad thing necessarily, because we're all growing in this um, ecosystem, as you put it. This is such a large ecosystem across the media landscape, and I totally agree with that. We'll leave it at that. I think we agree with way more than we disagree with, but that's not even the point. It's more
Hmm.
so just learning, getting exchanges of ideas, and I encourage my audience to go check out all of your information. I'm going to link Ad Fontes Media, the official website, onto our episode description. This is a beautiful episode 86. Beautiful people. Tomorrow we have Radhika Desai. We're going to discuss her book. She was previously on the show about 2 months ago. And we just have a plethora of guests down the road, politicians, professors, activists, different types of people. And we just want to say thank you again, Vanessa, for coming on to the show. This was a wonderful episode 86. And beautiful people, enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.